we always overestimate the impact in the short term, yet we underestimate it in the long term. And I think we're probably in that stage here. We'll talk about an AI bubble. Well, every technological revolution comes with a bubble, and this is probably the biggest technological revolution in the history of humanity. So it stands to reason that it's probably also the biggest bubble. So it'll probably have the biggest overestimation in the short term and the biggest underestimation in the long term. So I think the biggest difference for me is, I feel it, and I have some pattern matching. In 1995, I only felt it. So what was your journey, and how did it, every single day of our lives, every single moment, Seth, has led to this one right here.
This one right here.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of Let's Vibe. My name's Ian Rogers. I'm here with longtime friend and colleague Seth Goldstein, and we are, let's be honest, in our 50s, and we are, let's also be honest,
mid 50s,
or I would still say early. I'm 53.
Go ahead.
And we are, though, admittedly obsessed with coding, mostly using Claude Code. For me, my background is actually coding. I studied computer science at Indiana University in the early 90s and have been building software my whole career. But, a long time ago, I switched from that, like, I code every day role to, like, I send emails and, take meetings every day role, which they call management. But I would say really since last August for me, I've been completely obsessed with coding. I mean, AI, I would say, from the moment I had access to it in various forms, playing with AI coding for a few months now, and everything really changed in October. But today we're here to hear about Seth's journey and all this, and to kick us off on this sort of let's vibe journey. I think what Seth and I want to do is just like share where we are in all of this, and then try to bring other people along for the ride. I mean, the future's already here. It is not evenly distributed, and we have an opportunity to be distributors of the future. So let's do it. Seth, hi.
Hugh, we're going to have music, right? This is where we have our Let's Vibe theme song. What do we want it to be? What's the right, if you had to curate is it new music that we commission? Do we license something? Do we make something on Suno? What's the vibe here?
I think it has to be as good and as memorable as the Flintstones theme. So we're going to need to spend some real, well, we're going to need to spend some real tokens on it. Let's be,
Or
the
Jetsons? The Jetsons.
I thought came to mind as well, actually. Yeah, that came to mind as well. Yeah, I agree. It just, it definitely needs to be catchy. I did listen to Take Off to the Great White North by Bob and Doug McKenzie today, featuring Geddy Lee, which, there could be some cues there too. And maybe if we ask Suno to put those three things together, Flintstones, Jetsons, Bob and Doug McKenzie featuring Geddy Lee, Take Off to the Great White North, and we'd really probably have probably the next Despacito on our hands, I'm guessing. Despacito was special because it was a rap song, a Latin song, and a pop song, which is, there is no such thing as pop music anymore. So you have to get multiple genres to stand a chance. But Seth, tell me about the last 30 years and how the fuck you ended up here. Specifically, if you had to explain what you're doing today to you 30 years ago, how would you do it? But let's end there. First of all, who are you? What have you done over the last 30 years?
I'm Seth Goldstein. I'm a longtime friend of Ian Rogers. I'm here in New York City. There's a lot of symmetry. There's a lot of poetry. At this particular moment, was it January 30th, 31st or so? What is it?
30th.
30th. Okay. So we're at the end of January. It's 2026. I'm in New York. I just got in late last night, which is why I'm a little, because tonight is the celebration for the 30th reunion or 30th anniversary of Silicon Alley. Right. So I am here with, I came over with Fred Wilson, and Scott Heiferman is here, and John Borthwick is doing something, and Kevin Ryan is hosting something, and a whole bunch of suspects from 95, 96, when I came of age as an entrepreneur, as a technologist, as a citizen of this new media economy. I started my first company in August of 1995 called Site Specific. I was working before at Epicurious. Oh, this is perfect. This is flowing because this connects to where we're going, where we are. I was working at epicurious.com as an HTML programmer. I think I was making $60 or $70 an hour, which was a fortune. I guess it's pretty decent these days. You know, coding HTML, and wasn't really involved with editorial or sales. You know, God forbid. That was, you know, the muckety mucks. I remember Rochelle Udell was kind of running the whole thing. She had done stuff with Jerry De La Femina for like Calvin Klein. And you had all the editorial people and the sales people at Condé Nast. And this was a big initiative because it was the internet. It was new media. It was also around the time, notably, that Netscape launched. And when I describe this moment where we are with Claude Code and what's obsessing me, you know, the best parallel I have is when Netscape came out, which ages me because I lose a lot of people. A lot of people weren't born in 1995. They don't get the the reference. But when I look back, I don't know if you feel the same way. Like that was the big bang moment, right? Is we had a situation where there was all this latent infrastructure, right? We had ISPs, we had TCP/IP, we had the internet, and we had the concept of the World Wide Web. But it didn't really crystallize until you had Netscape, and Netscape kind of commercialized it and made it accessible in a way that, I mean, if you can name 5 of them, I'll give you a cookie. Like, what were the browsers pre-Netscape? There was Booklink. I used James Gleick, the great writer at Pipeline. He had his own like internet service. Obviously, there was Pipeline. I mean, there was Prodigy. There was AOL and CompuServe. AOL bought a bunch of these, and then Netscape was its own thing. And it was Jim Clark, right? And Mark Andreessen. And, you know, like you, Andreessen came from the great Midwest, from Illinois, and it was kind of like a bat out of hell. And not only Netscape 1, whenever that was, but Netscape 1.1 was when tables came out. And I remember coding tables/TD, and you could make these beautiful grids. And it seems so primitive now, right? When we think about what we're doing with AI. But when I try to describe Claude Code, Opus 4.5, whatever this kind of unlock is, it's a Netscape moment for me. Does that resonate with you?
1,000%. I mean, first of all, I just want to collect my cookie by saying before Netscape, there was Mosaic. There was
Yes,
also
Mosaic.
OmniWeb. There was Lynx, which was an ASCII-based browser. There was Cello,
Links.
I believe it was called, for Windows, which you
That's
had to
4.
install the
That's 4.
Trumpet WinSock. And well, I
Come
could
on.
say Gopher, but that's not actually an HTML browser. There was something for OS2, but fuck, I did say OmniWeb, which was for the next, but maybe I don't get my cookie. I completely agree with you. I haven't
You get
felt
half a
anything
cookie.
since
Yeah.
then. I think for me though, the difference is that we are this age now, right? And we've seen what we've seen. Because at the time, you know, I was just, all I remember feeling is shocked that anyone gave a shit what we were doing in academia, right? Because I had been doing internet stuff and web stuff even in academia, and it was like, you know, no one even wanted to talk to you. You know, if you mentioned it at a party, they would go talk to somebody else who was more interesting, right? But then there was this moment when suddenly people were interested. You know, for me, you know, I got, you know, calls to and hired to do work, and moved to LA. It was on the front page of the business section of the LA Times the moment I moved there. And, you know, like, it was like, what is happening? So I think that the difference now is I have like, you know, I've done a number of, you know, this is my 13th startup, depending on how you count. And so now just more battle scars and more perspective than I had then to actually recognize what it is and what could change. Because I think that the other thing is, like, we believed that the internet would change the world, but I don't think that we probably, you know, underestimated, actually, like, if you'd have really pushed us on how much would it be integrated into the fabric of society, you know, and if you'd have said, hey, you're right, Ian, the internet is going to change the world and one day Donald Trump will be president, I'd just go, yeah, come on, I don't think it's going to change the world that much, but here we are. And so I think that, that notion, I think there's the familiar feeling is that we always overestimate the impact in the short term, yet we underestimate it in the long term. And I think we're probably in that stage here. People talk about an AI bubble. Well, every technological revolution comes with a bubble, and this is probably the biggest technological revolution in the history of humanity. So it stands to reason that it's probably also the biggest bubble. So it'll probably have the biggest overestimation in the short term and the biggest underestimation in the long term. So I think the biggest difference for me is, I feel it, and I have some pattern matching. Back in 1995, I only felt it. So what was your journey, and how did it, every single day of our lives, every single moment, Seth, has led to this one right here.
This one right here. The other analogy, because I'm one with analogies to try to sense make, is I guess he recently passed, Oliver Sacks, right? Oliver Sacks wrote a lot of strange neurological conditions, right? Is, people waking up and suddenly being a certain way and that they weren't, right? And when I'm trying to communicate what I've been feeling, particularly the last month, but clearly over the last year and years, but the last month or two, the best way I can convey it is as if I was a story in an Oliver Sacks piece or book about a 55-year-old man who's never played music, who suddenly sits in front of a piano and plays Rachmaninoff. And you're like, what the fuck is coming out of my fingers? And you're just like disembodied from what you're doing. And it's you because it's not playing without you, but you never learned, like, you didn't put in the 10,000 hours. So on the one hand, I am in awe of what I'm doing. Like, truly, I've never been prouder, right? Of feeling like accomplishment, with deep imposter anxiety because this can't be real. I didn't study as much as I wanted to, like you, and I won't project onto you, but not just in my 50s, in my 20s, I wish I had studied computer science at MIT or Stanford. When I realized anywhere, right? But like when I realized where this medium was going and what the internet was about, and that I had sort of locked on to the internet, for lack of a better word, for my career. Early on, I was like, fuck, I'm a humanities guy. Like, I didn't put in the 4 years studying COBOL and C++ and whatever you study when you go deep into computer science. And so for all those years, the possibility of ever learning how to code kept moving into the background. Right? Kept, not only, I was 20s and I started a company, Site Specific, in 95. And it was a whirlwind, and we made websites for Duracell and Travelocity and Bristol Myers Squibb. An amazing run. Sold it to CKS Group, which was Cleary, Kwame, Suter. So Bill Cleary, Mark Kwame, Tom Suter were like the original Apple marketing guys for Steve Jobs. Tom Suter was the Johnny Ive of the moment for Jobs. And we sold it. And then I went on to actually I worked on a project called Root.net, which was like a digital concierge, which is giving me flashbacks from Claudebot, Moltbot, we can talk about. But I just kept running into, okay, next opportunity. And then I went to Flatiron Partners as an entrepreneur in residence. And I had what you'd call a successful founder career, but huge insecurity, never learning how to code. And I could talk a good game, and I can talk a great game technically, right? And I know about platforms, and I know about applications, and I know about APIs and SDKs and yada, yada, yada. But inside, I can't code. I couldn't code, right? So in every year they went, and then I had kids, got married, got divorced, but, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, I get from my 20s to my 30s to my 40s to my 50s. And every year, every so often I'd be like, something would come like JavaScript. I'm like, I'm going to take 6 months and I'm going to go deep and learn it. I didn't. Or Solidity comes with Ethereum. I'm going to become a smart contract developer. Right? Because I don't have the patience, right? I don't have that kind of like single-minded focus that I believe, I don't know, that the best programmers have. I'm a generalist. I'm great with words, right? I'm very communicative. I'm expressive. I'm a good writer. I studied humanities. I went to Columbia. I studied literature. all these things that in 1995 through 2025 were verboten when it came to technology, when it came to computers, when it came to AI. And then now, now like 3 days ago or a week ago, I have a conversation with Fred Wilson in San Francisco, and he's like, and I'm really excited about Claude Code and vibe coding and all the stuff that we are and we're going to be talking about on this podcast. And I'm like, I can build anything. He's like, no, you can't. I'm like, come on, try me. He's like, you can't grow corn. And like, go home, proofofcorn.com. Next thing you know, #1 on Hacker News. And it's like the fucking Matrix. This makes no sense. I'm not a coder. You know what I mean? So that's the strange emotional, intellectual, creative, cultural zeitgeist that we are in, which is what stimulated the idea for this podcast that I think is going to grow and is going to have a lot of interesting participants and guests. It is at the heart of this sort of existential dilemma that I'm feeling that goes back 30 years, but also says like, whoa, where are we going to be 30 years from now?
Well, and I want to add another analogy and double click on this a bit, because I think you're pointing at what this actually is, right? The thing that's just happened to writing code is what happened to music, I would say, in the 90s with Pro Tools, and then in the 2000s with things like TuneCore and MySpace. And what I mean by that is, like, if you and I made music in the 70s, we would have had really no ability to distribute it. Right. I mean, punk rock came out of this frustration, but to get a studio is thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. To press vinyl or cassettes or CDs is thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. And then if we had like 10 boxes of vinyl, how are we going to get them to people around the world? Right. This is why independent record labels and these things, were kind of, they were beasts by today's standards, in their own right. But in the 90s, we started to be able to make music on computers, Pro Tools. I remember using a Nex in the early 90s to copy paste music, and I had exactly the same feeling that you were describing with coding, which is, one, why isn't everybody using this tool? Why is this not? But that's another lesson, that future was here. It was not yet evenly distributed. But also, I really felt like an imposter, because here I am sitting at a computer copying and pasting loops and making music. But I was also thinking, well, I mean, no one thinks this is music but me, right? And then in the 2000s, I mean, I've heard Jimmy Iovine say that 2006 record contracts, recording contracts for artists, was a moment when they shifted. And that was because, I remember this moment when, Drake was the hottest artist on MySpace and every label wanted to sign him. And Drake released his album on TuneCore, self-released, self-published to iTunes, and the whole music industry went, shit, what if they don't need us anymore? Right. And recording contracts got much better as a result. But, now making music is, anyone can do it from a laptop. Distributing music, anyone can do it from a laptop. We've got, whether it's tools like DistroKid or Bandcamp or whatever. That doesn't mean that there are no, Ed Sheerans and, and Taylor Swift's and, popular artists. That just means that, the differentiator is something else. It's not access to the recording contract, access to the studio time, et cetera. To me, that, this is, what's happened, and you're now writing code with what you learned in college, which is the English language, right? And you have decades of experience, as you said, with the truly hard, no, all of it's hard, right? But with some of the unsung hard parts, which are, as you said, thinking architecturally, getting your ideas out and across, deciding like, well, I don't know, is it the right time for this or that? Do we go this direction or that direction? And I just wanted to also encourage anyone listening, and you'll have to tell me if it's possible, for people to watch the Bright Moments documentary, because, even as someone who's known you a very long time, I had a completely different appreciation for you, the Bandcamp guy, the guy that was the theater kid. right? I really
Bad
saw it.
word. Theater kid's a bad word these
No, it's a
days.
great, but this is my point. You already said it. I'm a humanities guy. By the way, I have a Bachelor of Arts in computer science because
Okay.
I transferred from education into computer science, and I didn't have enough science credits to get your Bachelor of Science. And
Are
when
you
I
the
did,
only one with a Bachelor of Arts in computer science that you know?
I would be curious to know how many people in 1994 got a Bachelor of Arts in computer science, because when I did, it was like a consolation prize. And my guidance counselor was like, don't worry, I don't think anyone will notice. And then many years later, Ryan McIntyre at Foundry asked me if I would help him lobby University of Colorado at Boulder to add a Bachelor of Arts in computer science, because as investors, they wanted more people who had a mix. And when Jimmy Iovine, I helped Jimmy Iovine with their initial curriculum for the Iovine Young being Andre Young, aka PKA Dr. Dre. They opened a university at USC, the Iovine Young Academy of Arts, and I was involved in the creation of some of the early the first curriculum there. Mm, And then when I went to speak at a class a year or two later, the instructor introduced me. She said, "We're very proud to have Ian here today because Jimmy told us that Ian was the inspiration for this school," which, by the way, is not true. Like, I know from talking to Jimmy that the inspiration came out of the introduction to the Walter Isaacson book on Steve Jobs. Jimmy wanted to create Steve Jobs people, not Ian Rogers people, just to be clear. At the same time, I am proud to be part of that lineage of like, arts and science to arts and science, if you will. So I really encourage people, though, to watch the Bright Moments documentary, because I thought it really comes through at exactly what you were trying to do with Bright Moments, and why it was not technology, it was theater, it was community, and it was using these technological constructs to build those things. I mean, I think that's actually a really great description of who you are, much better than any resume. Maybe it's worth like hearing a couple of words though about Turntable.fm, because I think Turntable.fm was an exactly it was. By the way, my daughter Zoe sent me a picture of her and Liz Heller from last night.
Nice. Shout
Speaking
out to
of
Liz.
probably of how we met, one of my favorite Liz Heller stories of late. She was at our apartment for dinner maybe last year, and another friend was over from Paris, and my friend asked Liz, "So how do you guys know each other?" And Liz looked at her and said, "Listen, if you were doing digital music in 1994, everyone knew each other." And I feel like, and there was a time a couple of years ago, by the way, Raoul Paul sitting at our dining table, and he said, "We're always going to remember that this is the moment when everyone knew each other." So I love these moments, by the way. But Turntable.fm was a sensation, and then it was maybe too addictive. Like, how would you contextualize that particular episode?
It had a what do they say the difference between like heroin and weed? Like heroin has a low bottom and like weed has a high bottom. Is that right? Not that I know. But
Fat bottom girls? I don't know.
my point is that Turntable was too addictive. Like a lot of people, even while it was running, was like, I loved Turntable. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I just went too far. I couldn't do anything else. I had to stop. Right. Whereas you can put on Spotify or whatever, Apple Music, and just kind of listen in the background. And Turntable was risk on. You were in it.
That
Right.
was
And,
definitely my
and,
experience.
right. And
I was
so, which is the dream, of founders and Billy, is really the founder and the inventor of Turntable. And I was along for the ride, but it was just for those that don't know, even though it, compared to Netscape, Turntable to me feels like yesterday, but it was still 15 years ago, right? 2010. And, for this class of 25 to 30-year-old, crypto AI dudes for the most part, unfortunately, they don't have a frame of reference for Turntable either.
right.
Um, but it was a wonderful moment, a kind of spectacle when there was no dominant music operating system the way that Spotify has become. Spotify was around. I remember Mark Ruxon was probably the one that showed me. And I remember going to his office at some ad agency. It wasn't like BBDO. It was one of these agencies in San Francisco. And I remember seeing Spotify. And of course, that first feeling of like, whoa, that's fast. How do they get the music so fast? We take it for granted now. But like, oh my God, there's the music, it's immediate. And that was the sort of the utilitarian mandate of Spotify. And it wasn't pervasive yet. And it wasn't clear that that was going to become the dominant way we listen to music, the way it has become. And Turntable came around and it said, well, music can be social. Music can be a social communal experience that we do together. I hadn't thought of this until right now about like connecting it to bright moments, but it was this idea that we're all in a room together and we're experiencing music together. And there's 5 people. There was no bots at the time. There was no agents. Now it would be all agents, but there was real people on the decks taking turns playing music, DJing for each other. And it's basically listening to music together, not just sonically, but visually. So it had that feeling of Second Life. It was like Roblox before Roblox or Minecraft before Minecraft, but it was also Spotify and iTunes and all of that. And it was a metaverse and it was a lot of things wrapped in one, and it captured a moment so beautifully. And I remember my favorite moments of Turntable because it was a pivot out of something called Sticky Bits. Sticky Bits was how it started, and Billy Chasen was a great artist and inventor and founder here in New York. I came up with this idea, and he was early BetaWorks, and he started something called Chartbeat that became, and also Bitly. He was involved with Bitly early on. He was kind of the original CTO of BetaWorks. And Sticky Bits was this idea of augmented reality, of having stickers with QR codes, or not even QR codes, they were barcodes, linear, not square. And each barcode was different, and you could put it, on a wall as digital graffiti and scan it with an app and leave a message. So I put the sticker on the wall, I'd download the Sticky Bits app, I'd scan it, I'd leave a message. If you walk by, it said, download the app to read this message. And there was no AR, VR, whatever, you'd scan it, it would work. We gave away 10,000 or 12,000 sticker books, like matchbooks at South by Southwest, I want to say 2010. We met Chris Sacca, we met Gary Vee, we met all those yokels. They became advisors, investors, First Round Capital, a couple of others, Mitch Kapoor. And then it was ahead of the market. There was no real like functional use cases. And inevitably we got called into advertising and branding and putting Sticky Bits on Coca-Cola bottles. And we pivoted, and he had sort of, we had like, I think 700 grand in the bank. And Billy's like, I have this idea it was totally different than what we were doing. He was like, what if we do blah, 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 and have people make music together and take turns and we can connect it to a catalog? We're like, why the fuck not? So we rolled into Turntable, and it was a hit. And it wasn't a hit economically. It was the music business, but it was a hit culturally, and everybody got it. And it was fun, and it was visceral. And we didn't ask permission from the labels. And I don't want to have this whole episode go towards that. But there was a moment where it had all this music. People from all over the world were coming into these rooms, listening to music together. And I remember like a hip hop room, people from Tokyo and people from Detroit, all listening to hip hop together. And it was awesome. And then the labels took notice, and we started to get licensed from them, and we just shut down access. And then the whole thing kind of withered and died. But it was a performance. It was a spectacle. It had a lot of the best of what we're feeling now, anytime you have these breakthrough moments. And I think that's what we're talking about. And kind of bringing it back to the bridge now. We've got 95 Netscape, right? That was a moment. Clearly, 2000, 2001 bubble burst. It was an e-commerce moment. Amazon, et cetera. But also the death of pets.com and Cosmo, et cetera. We had the iPhone moment, 2007, 2008 with mobile. We had that Turntable moment, obviously smaller, but important culturally.
And overall, you had social moment there because you had MySpace, Facebook, ultimately Instagram, et cetera. So like there's 10 years of social growth. And with Turntable, one of the interesting things is that now social music is WhatsApp. You know what I mean? WhatsApp groups. Like there's not really that social experience, that it hasn't been replaced by something else. So I would say that
and to
entire
bright moments,
moment,
to the point, like bringing it back, like we were in a deep depression in the pandemic. We were all alone. We were all disconnected. And I think what Bright Moments was, and I encourage people to watch the documentary. If you go to my Twitter, it's the pinned tweet at Seth. But it was about, okay, we're all alone on our screens at home, collecting things, buying and selling watches, cards, cars, whatever people did during the pandemic, stocks, meme stocks. And then NFTs came around. And then there was not only an opportunity, but it felt to me like there was a responsibility to reconnect physically, to go out in the world and have these experiences, which started in Venice Beach, but then quickly went to New York and Berlin, where I remember you coming both nights, Hedwig, in that spectacle of spectacles and having that experience. And it was like breathing air for us as cultural beings. You know, it wasn't just, oh, I can go out to the store now and take off my mask. It was like, no, I'm in fucking Kraftwerk and I'm with 1,000 people and I'm looking at, a 30 by 30 foot screen that's showing pixel art. Like, what the fuck? Right. And unfortunately, Web3 got taken over by degeneracy and speculation and, but so do all these moments. Like, kind of, you talked about that in the beginning, is they overshoot,
Always.
right? And then things settle and then you see what you're left with, like a pearl. And I do think, you talk about, Raoul Paul and that moment a couple years ago. We were sitting around looking at Kim Asendorf's Pixel Decks before it came and we saw it. And it wasn't about the floor price and it wasn't about anything else. It was about, in the midst of all of this boom and bust, there is art that still brings us together around a dining room table in Paris with 15 or 20 people that will always remember where they were when they saw it for
Exactly.
the first time.
I mean, so, there are these, when genres are new, anything is possible. Ambitions are huge. These are always the best moments. If you look at the beginning of hip hop, when you weren't sure yet, is it positive? Is it gangster? Is it about old people, young people? It was all of the above in the late 80s and early 90s. And the moment that someone could say, "Oh, that's not hip hop," then it's over. Like, it was the same in electronic music. I remember the first time I heard Aphex Twin thinking like, this is the future. And it was this time when electronic music didn't mean anything yet, really. It could be anything. And I think similarly being with you at Kraftwerk in Berlin, it was that same thing. Your ambition was unbounded. There were no rules. There's no fucking rules, dude. And there was absolutely no rules yet. And there weren't, no one knew where it goes tomorrow. And so I think that that's what frontiers are. Like, possibilities are endless. And I think, I always reference Carlotta Perez's book, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, which is about exactly that. Every technological revolution comes with a boom and a bust. And then you get 30 years of sustained growth. And I really believe, and we'll talk about this a lot over the course of this podcast, that, this is the new oil, right? The new oil is tokens. And that is the economy of tomorrow. It is the level of abstraction. And actually, what we're here to talk about, and let's turn to your Claude Code experience next. But to me, this is a level of abstraction on what it is I learned in college. When I was in college, I took a class on assembly language, and the context for the class was, oh, don't worry, you're never going to use this, but it's important that you know how a computer works, right? Because it's going to help you when you're writing C++ or whatever you're writing in the future. Right now, if you're taking a computer science course, then you're probably studying data structures in C, or this is what they're still teaching at the college level. But the context actually must be, don't worry, you're never going to write these lines of code, but it is very helpful for you to understand, how a computer works. And so just the same as C is a layer of abstraction on top of, programming and assembly, what you're doing with the English language is a layer of abstraction on top of, whatever the programming language underneath that Claude Code is writing in. And this is, and just like, tokens are a layer of abstractions on top of the energy that they're using, right? So how did you find your way into exactly? We're always building on the shoulders of giants. As Tony Fadell told me, without Next in the 80s, there would have been no, iPhone in the 2000 in the aughts, right? Because your Mac computer is running on BSD, right? So we are all building on the shoulders of giants. So tell me about how did you start working with Claude Code, and what was the aha moment for you?
So I'm going to connect some dots with you. So from being together at Kraftwerk in Berlin for Bright Moments Berlin in May of 2022 to basically April of 2024 when you DJ'd one of the final sets for the Bright Moments Artists Party in Venice at the Venice Hotel. That was it was kind of full circle for me. And, Bright Moments went from Venice to Venice. And in the end, it was about empowering artists and giving artists a narrative that was not so individualistic. It was tribal, but it wasn't like gallery tribal. It was a beautiful thing. And for me, Bright Moments was a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's still hard to end things, especially when they turn out good. It's easy to end things when they're bad. You're like, okay, done, move on. But ironically, Bright Moments is probably will be one of the top things I've ever done creatively, professionally, partly because it was designed to be finished. We set our own rules. We're like, okay, if we mint out 10,000 and we get to the end, we win. That's our rule. And it wasn't about going public. It wasn't about getting bought or sold. It was about, can we do this? Can we go around the world and mint 10,000 of these fucking characters in 10 different cities, one being the Galacticans, which was sort of space. If you remember, it was New York. It was Venice Beach, New York, Berlin, London, Mexico City, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, Paris, Venice, right? So after that, exhaustion. After that, 54, 53 years old. And every cycle, I get older. I feel less relevant. I feel, what the fuck am I doing? I'm a founder. I'm an entrepreneur. I should have become a venture capitalist 20 years ago, just stuck with that and had a fuck ton of money. Like all these feelings happen because I'm empty. I'm done. And with Bright Moments, as successful as it was over. I knew not to keep trying to squeeze juice out of the fruit. And we still had the team and, God bless, Mickey to sort of support a lot of the team in building out Node Foundation, because that really came off the back of Phil and Chan and Jeff and a lot of the diaspora of Bright Moments. Ended up putting that together. And there was other kind of side quests to kind of keep the team engaged, but the project was over. Christy and I, shout out to Christy, could not do any of this without her. Shout out to Hedwig. We were depressed. I was depressed. I was exhausted. I had nothing left. And I didn't have a staff. I didn't have a big runway to keep building things. It got, over the course of 2025. I mean, this is the real talk. The music stopped. The tour was over. Nobody prepares you for that because Bright Moments accelerated into the finish because the market was collapsing. Crypto, God bless crypto, fucking sucks, right? And that's another conversation. But like all the energy was drained. All the rugs had been pulled, the Trump coins, all that, the meme coins, all that stuff. And we're living in Venice. The fires happened, a year ago, moved to San Francisco. I just felt irrelevant and I didn't want to live off of, the memory of Bright Moments. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what was next. What I did think about, and this kind of gets to your point, the tagline for Bright Moments was where art is born. And so I had this idea of, probably since the end of 2024, agents were coming, right? We saw it with virtuals. We saw it with Eliza. We saw it with Goatsy and Truth Terminal. I remember talking with Raul in October of 2024 when he was in Paris. And it was exciting. I was like, wow, these agents are now making tokens and they're making things. And what if they start making art, right? And instead of where art is born, what about where artists are born? And that was the next like hook for me to kind of like tug on that string. And it led me in a long circuitous way to Gene Kogan and the work he was doing with Abraham.ai, which we kind of premiered at Ledger a few months back in the fall. And so long story short, I kind of threw my lot in with Gene and Xander and this crazy group of AI artists, AI technologists, kind of Mad Max, kind of like if like Burning Man met OpenAI in Palm Springs, the desert, at Bombay Beach, which is where Mars is. So it's a weird kind of like eclectic, uncommercial, but super technological community of people designing AI systems and AI artists. And I got involved. I raised a little bit of capital, small team. And then in July or August, because if you go to eden.art, you'll see the website needs a lot of love. It's hard to navigate because they're all in their head, and you go behind the scenes and it's like it's fantasy land, but to the outside world is apocryphal. And so my first thought was, I gotta fix the web. I gotta work on marketing here. We gotta hire a team. And what Gene said was, why don't you just vibe code this yourself? Okay, so that's how we get here. This was July last year. And I was like, fuck, okay, And so I went from Manus and V0 and Replit and all that stuff. And I think that's when I cracked open Claude Code, right? So that was the gateway drug for me to where we are now, 7, 8 months later. God knows how many markdown files later, how many sessions later, how many tokens later, how much infra later, how many projects later to get here. Now, Solene was a big part of this because I had a real agent that I was standing up that was personal. Now, this was a project with Christy and I, and this is her art and training Solene, and I'm behind the scenes trying to stand this autonomous artist up. But I got dirty. I got my fingers in it. I realized how to connect Vercel to Supabase, to all of, to GitHub, to all this shit, and made all these mistakes. But because it was art, I didn't have to worry about the roadmap. I didn't worry about the investor update. I didn't worry about product market fit, God forbid. It's an artist. It's an art project. And when you move into that territory, there's a lot of, I love the word, there's a lot of affordances. There's a lot of surface area. There's a lot of latent space. And so that's what got me going.
And how did it, like, then what? Like, how did you decide, like, okay, this is what I do. This is my practice now. This is my job. Like, how did it evolve for you? I want to actually just share with the audience, you were definitely responsible for getting me into Claude Code, because I had been, like I said, playing with AI from the beginning and even doing some AI coding. I'd even made this thing out of AI tools, but I hadn't used Claude Code at all. And then you came and stayed with us. And I was like, Seth, what, are you okay, man? You clearly have a problem.
It was
Like, you were,
October. Like, let's date it. It was October, September, late September, early October
because
of
it was the prep for
2025.
Periphoto. Yeah,
Yep.
prep for Periphoto. And I was like, you are addicted to something, man. Like, you are just sitting at my dining table.
Couldn't
It's
shut
like,
the laptop.
yes.
I had to keep it
And
open.
and so I was like, okay. I was like, why Claude Code and not, whatever. You're like, just dive in. You know, I I did. I actually think it must have been slightly before, because I remember this change to 4.5, right? Like, which was a big jump. But for you, like, how did you go from that sort of experiment to, and where are you now? Like, where are you with it? Like, what's the next step for you?
We're here. Let's vibe. I mean, this is kind of what it's about. Is I think you touched on it, and I think we're 48 minutes into this, and we haven't mentioned the word AGI. But to me, and I think we will look back at not just Claude Code, but Opus 4.5 as the moment that AGI appeared. And it'll take years to really cauterize all this and to sort of like classify this properly in the history of technology and the history of culture. But that was it. That was a light bulb. And technology revolutions don't announce themselves, right? We look back and say, oh, it's Netscape 95. Oh, it was the iPhone 2007. But this is it. It was Christmas 2025 when all these forces came together, and you know, years, the last 5 years of OpenAI and ChatGPT and Claude and transformer models, and attention is all you need. So you had all the technology, right? You had all of the prosumer surfaces getting easier and easier to use, the lovables, the make your own apps, the Manus, whatever, we were using up until Claude, right? And then we had people over Christmas who went home, didn't have their job because they were with their family, and fucked around and found out. The same way it happened in Christmas of 2021 with NFTs and crypto, is you have a moment in the year where people somehow around the world are trying new things for the first time, and it pours gas on the fire culturally. And so that's why. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this podcast. That's the opening of this new chapter. I don't know what we call it. I think AGI is a little highfalutin. I think vibe coding is here. I mean, I'm curious to like Rick Rubin is he's with us, right? As a cultural mentor, as a guide, as a spiritual leader. And of all the things for him to attach himself to technically, because he's famously non-technical, deeply, deeply thoughtful about technology, but he's not on stage at NVIDIA. He's not doing that shit. But so why does he come out and sort of anoint the word vibe coding? I'll turn that over to you.
Well, I think I'll save this one for
Okay.
when I
I
tell
interview
my
you
story,
next.
because I'll the Rick Rubin story of vibe coding is a very specific one for me, and it continues to this day. I wake up every morning with a pile of texts from we're on very different time zones, Rick and I, and every morning when I wake up, I have a pile of texts from Rick, many of which are about vibe coding, and I really am thankful for it, to be honest, because and that is the short answer to the question is curiosity. He has an innate curiosity, and he wants to understand things at an emotional level. I was going to say spiritual, but I think that, you know, for him that's relevant as well. But he's very interested in like, what does this mean? Not just what can it do, but I do think you know, I agree that this is why we're here right now, is because we've been bitten by this bug personally, and we want to share that with other people. But also there has been this moment, and I agree that AGI is a little highfalutin and it doesn't even mean anything to most. So the way that I would explain it to my mom or dad is I would say there was this moment that we went from I can ask AI stuff and it will give me information to I can ask AI to do stuff for me and it will do it amazingly well. I had kind of like a moment I'll never forget with Claudebot on Monday, where I told Claudebot that my train was late, and was asking it if it would what time six the car rental place was open until. And not only did it answer the question, but it suggested that it email six, the local six branch for me. And I said, okay. And then I'll never forget that. I'll keep that in my sent folder forever. Like the email that it sent in half a second was one of those like, wow, I've been thinking about how to do things wrong, right? Like, how do you live? How do you just be a human? I've been contextualizing wrong. So that is exactly why we're here. Like, you know,
Can I
this
just
is a
one
moment.
thing and I kind of just like I didn't even deal with this yet because I don't even know if it's true or it's hallucinated. But yesterday I was getting ready to fly from California to New York from LA, and I was, you know, busy trying to connect ClaudeBot because I have my own Seth agent that I built up in Claude Agent SDK with my data lake of all my. So I've got my Limitless pendant, like all my recordings. I've got my granola recordings. I've got my Aura ring. I've got my Google browser history, clickstream. I've got my location history. I've got all my emails, my markdown files, my chat GPT logs, like you name it. I've got the quantified Seth that I'm also connecting to ClaudeBot so I can access it via my gateway. And I've got it set up on my Mac Studio that I just got before they all got sold out the last couple of weeks. I bought that a couple of weeks ago in San Francisco. I'm running to the airport. I'm at the airport. I'm trying to get on the plane and I'm trying to make sure like, okay, ClaudeBot talks to the gateway, that I'm on my tail scale, whole thing. And then it says, oh, here are your P0 items. By the way, I went ahead and I called the IRS and negotiated a payment plan for you. And I don't know if it's real or not.
I mean, you got to let us know. You got to let us know. Maybe Claudebot, maybe that should be my next use of Claudebot, is to try to get the money that the French government owes me that I haven't been able to get since 2019. This would
But
be an amazing
maybe Ian had
Claudebot
already
story.
did. Maybe it
Yeah,
already did.
maybe it already did.
Maybe they already funneled it into your 401k and you don't even know about it.
Well, and this is, you know, well, security will come up over over the course of these conversations, because this is
Emotional
also
security?
also
Like feeling secure about your future? Is that what you're talking
I
about?
was just thinking about the Seth honeypot that exists out there, you know, which is insane. Let's do this in the time we have left. You know, one of the things that I think we want to achieve with this podcast is, you know, enabling people to do their own stuff. And like, so, when you talk to friends, I mean, there's a huge gap, right? There's an AI gap generally, a big gap between, people who are embracing, people who are very skeptical, from people who I think, look, if we scan most of our friends, probably they're all using AI all the time and they're not using Claude Code, right? Like that's kind of like where we are. Where do you think like people should start at this point? I feel like as an old sysadmin, being very familiar with the command line, being ambidextrous and knowing how to use both Emacs and VI is a real strong suit. I'm pretty comfortable with all of these tools, but I wouldn't necessarily wish them on other people. I think the Claude desktop app is a huge boon. And actually, I think more than Claude bot, like people using the Claude desktop app to use, I really actually like how they have kind of three panes. One is ask me a question. Another one is, well, here's questions, but I have access to a place on your hard drive that's called, co-work. And then there's
Yep.
also Claude Code. So I can
Yep.
use Claude Code without ever needing to open terminal. And I don't have to know that control U goes back
So
to the
listen,
beginning of the line.
you brought it up. You said links before.
Absolutely.
LYNX, right? I think that's where
Yep.
we are.
University
And
of
I think
Kansas. Yeah.
there we go. Proof of
Yeah.
corn.
Proof of
Very
corn.
close. Mark Andreessen, Illinois. So we're back in the heartland, Indiana.
Yep.
Larry Bird, where I grew up.
Yep.
I grew up as a fan.
David
Um,
Letterman.
the list goes on. But I think
Yeah.
the point is, in the beginning, I think there's a Neil Stephenson. I think it's Neil Stephenson. In the beginning was the command line.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where we are. And I think we should end on that note of Back to the Future. There's this thing on your laptop that we all have. It's called the terminal. And we never use it. It was sitting on my laptop for, I don't know, 30 years. Never used it. Every so often along the way, some developer would be like, oh, you got to install this. Nah, I don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then you open it up and you install Claude Code on your terminal. And I'm going to say, forget the desktop. Like, let's get people to open up this thing called terminal. You do command space on your Mac. If you're using Linux, God bless you, you're already past this. If you're using Windows, fine. But you do command space and type in TERM, and this thing will come up called terminal. It's like text edit. It's like calculator. It's one of these built-in programs from, I don't know, the 90s. You're going to install Claude Code on that, and you'll probably need to it'll ask you to install Homebrew and Node.js. I don't even know what they do, but I know you just got to do it. And you're going to think it's like going backwards, but it is the future. And I think that's where it started for me. It probably started for you, this whole journey. And I think, yes, we probably will move away from this terminal experience, but there's something so raw and organic and nurturing about it when it comes to technology that I'm living in the terminal now. I can't go on the web. It slows me down. It feels like saccharin,
I think there is something, it is worth like dwelling on this for a second, because I've had a similar experience. Like I said, so when I first used Claude Code, I just loved it because for me, it is legitimately Back to the Future, right? This is where I started. I started at the command line, first the DOS command line, but then the VAX command line, the Unix command line. I used to know my way around different flavors of Unix. I used to have a Next slab on my desk and an IBM like AIX machine under my desk, and then an OS2 machine next to it. This was in my work that I did at the music library in college. So I was a command line creature. So when I saw Claude Code, I was like, this is so much fun. And it's also probably only built for me. My thought was like, okay, this is a moment in time that I will always remember. I'm going to savor it because I will always remember like when I first started using Claude Code. And then of course, like this thing will be over, this command line thing. But what's happened in the intervening months is I noticed that actually people who are serious about this, the first thing that you build, if you're building something serious with AI, is a command line interface, is a CLI. Why? And actually, in many cases, you can communicate with third-party software. You mentioned Vercel or Supabase or GitHub. You can communicate with those with MCP, which is, for those who don't know, a language where two machines can talk to each other using AI. Actually, pros do it using a command line interface because the command line interface uses fewer tokens, it's faster, et cetera. And I started thinking, oh shit, maybe command line interfaces are both the past and the future. And then I realized something else in terms of why these command line interfaces are so powerful. And it's because of AI. It's because what we are doing fundamentally is using the English language, human language, to build things using computers. And command line interfaces, well, so when it was just the command line and you didn't know what to do, well, then there used to be these thing called man pages. You would type man and then the command, and then you had to know a lot of command line shit to know more shit. But now, because at the command line is AI, and you're not typing in like command minus ls piped to this, that, like redirected to ampersand numeral. Now that you're not doing that, now what you're doing is using the English language. And when you're stuck, you can say, I'm stuck. How do I get out of this hole? And you have this super intelligent being at the command line talking to you. That's why these command lines are so powerful. So now the interface becomes, well, I can hit Command T and have 10 of these command lines, and I can do. And so this is why I agree with you, Seth. Like I like your directive to people, which is like, shed your fear of the command line, open up terminal, go to Claude Code, and there's a little copy paste and it'll talk you through the rest, right? If you can get Claude Code up and running, well, now you can't be stuck anymore, because when you're stuck, Claude will unstick you. Don't know what you're doing? Don't know why. There are lots of times actually when I tell Claude, and please tell me what you're doing and why you're doing it, because I want to learn. Right. And I do that both in a technical context, but sometimes also I did it with an app I was building around food, and I wanted to know more about wine, and I asked it specifically to tell me the whys, right? So you can, anything that you can dream up, you can do with these tools. So I think that's
Command Shift 4 is a screenshot. And the pro tip, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, the ability to copy anything on your screen and dump it into your terminal in Claude Code so it sees what you see. That's magic, right? Copy and paste, grab any image, any screenshot, dump that into Claude Code and say, this is what I'm seeing, help me.
now you can also install the Claude Chrome plugin, and then you type Claude space minus minus Chrome, and it will attach to your browser, and it can see anything that's in your browser, and you can tell it, it'll say like, go try it. And I say, no, you go try it.
Yep.
and it does.
It'll book you a
So
U-Haul. That's what I just did because we're moving story, but
that's
yeah.
nice work. All right. Well, that's a fine place to end this first episode of Let's Vibe. This is super fun already, man. Thank you. I love this. Thank you for inviting me on this
Do I hit
this
this? Do I hit
journey.
the stop button now?
I think we're
I'm gonna
supposed
hit
to
the stop
say
button.
like,
Thanks to all of our sponsors.
yeah, I'd like to thank Monster Energy Drink and Trojan Condoms.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good journey. We get you get you on the spotlight next time, and then episode 3, we'll see.
Yeah.
We got some ideas, but I hope that we can get into the nitty gritty and really giving people the tools they need to explore all this, because it is just a major fucking unlock.
Yeah. And I think the major question is going to be like, how much of it can be, it's a deep rabbit hole, right? So if if you start too deep, then it's hard to bring people, down as far as you are, right? So figure out the right level to start us at. Cool.
I'm gonna hit stop here.